Well, okay, so does everybody know how to raise a hand? Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Everybody know that one? So, okay, you go to reactions at the bottom of your screen, and you'll find there's the option to raise a hand like that. There's a yellow hand in my screen. I mean, we're a small enough group that if you wave at me, I'll see it. But if I don't wave at you, great, Jana. But it's quite a useful one to know on Zoom. But because if I don't see you and the hand goes up, then you don't have to sit there like a lemon with your hand up. I eventually get there. Okay, so great, you found it. Yes. We've
How do I put it down again?
Go to the same point and it says lower hand. That's a very even better point. Yes. So you go back to that reaction.
Lower hand. There we got it.
There you got it. Great.
Okay.
Okay. Who's got a copy of the book? Fine. Who hasn't got a copy of the book? Okay, a few of you. Yes, that's okay. And who's seen Robert's webinars? I mean, Grace just said she'd seen them. Who else has seen them? There's some podcasts up there. They're on my website, actually. They're great fun. He did 8 interviews with me, which was.
I stopped after the 3rd or something.
Oh yes, quite. Number 8's the best.
Okay.
So flip through to 8. Yeah, it's where we talk about Goldien inhibition. Yeah.
I mean, all the podcasts on body learning, or
that's right. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I say there's 8 of them. Yeah, Robert gave me a real run, which was really kind of him. All about Miss Goldie's work, and yeah, here comes Tina. Good, our other Irish person. So it's FM's birthday today. Let's raise him a toast. He would be 153, not 152, as I said. 153. So yeah, amazing. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes and just describe what this is all about and why my story of how I got there, and then we'll open the floor and we'll have a good old discussion and go from there. So started with a little bit about me. So I read zoology originally. So I'm been interested from the start in how animals move. I was always a whole animal person. The minute they cut them up and killed them, I wasn't interested. I want them whole. I wanted to see their behavior, see how they interact, see their environment, and evolution. So those were passions right from the start. And then I fell out with science during my PhD, discovered Alexander technique, well, all the way around, discovered Alexander technique and holistic thinking, and fell out with science, and went off to train. And my first teachers were Carrington teachers, lovely people, calm me right down, lovely slow spiraling of the legs and so on. And then I then moved to London and went to McDonald teachers, lots of sort of strong up and strong pulls and all very different, and again tremendous work. And I trained at Misha's, which is the McDonald school, and lots of up. And I put on half a stone in the first term of training, and people were telling me I was looking slimmer, and I realized it was muscle, and this had gone on my back. So I put on real muscle during the first term. And Misha's was great at building confidence. It was very energetic and it was very alive, very vibrant work. And then I finished and built a practice. And within 6 months, I'd fallen apart. I couldn't hold myself together. And I realized I didn't know what I was doing enough, how to look after myself in the process of teaching. And that's what took me to Miss Goldie. Everybody know who Miss Goldie is? Anyone not know who Miss Goldie is? Grace, do you know who Miss Goldie is?
Just what you spoke about with Robert.
That's right. Good.
You spoke about her hands, that she wanted teachers to have strong hands.
She didn't say that directly. She wanted teachers to have strong backs. She really wanted us to have strong backs. And I thought I'd got a strong back because I'd put on all that muscle. But in fact, she told me I'd got a weak back. And those first few lessons, she lost no time in telling me what rubbish I was. One of her favorite lines was, "You ask me that, and you call yourself a teacher of the Alexander technique? Why, Mr. Alexander would be turning in his grave to hear what you are asking in the name of his technique," which is not what I would say to a new teacher personally. And I already knew how to shed insults. So I let the insults shed off and I asked, what's the real message here? And the real message is, you're a mess. You don't know anything. You don't know even what you think you know. You're weak and I can sort it. And I thought, okay, that's what I need to hear, because I knew I was a mess. And so the lessons carried on and she collapsed my back, my lovely upright back. And within a few lessons, I was back in a slump because she realized that all this nice upright back was actually fixed. And over the next 6 months, she just started to work and she brought about something completely different. She rebuilt me from the inside out. It was, she brought the core muscles into play. She connected me up. She integrated me. It was totally different. And by the time she'd finished with me, I was much, much stronger than before, right through into my fingertips. And I could then throw a ball in a straight line for the dog, which I'd never been able to do before. It was very different. And it was such different biomechanics. There was such different, there were moves I'd never encountered before. She seemed to have a model of the body I had never encountered before. She brought me to quiet in a way I'd never encountered before. And when she brought me to quiet, she wanted me to do that at home before I, say, picked up my kettle, you know. And so that one of the, I think after lesson 6, I went home and looked at my kettle and stopped and came to this quiet place and then went for the kettle. My hand moved in a completely different way. My whole body followed in a whole different way. I discovered the primary control all over again. And she was really pleased, although she didn't put it in that language because she didn't, that she was, because that was Alexander's own discovery process, is what I got from her. And to her, the technique has gone the other way up. We are told what the primary control is. You let your neck free, you let your head go forward, you let your out lengthen and widen. You take charge of that, and then you control how your body moves. Whereas she wanted me to come to quiet and let what I now call the self-organizing of the nervous system, which I think is one of Alexander's core discoveries, that our system self-organizes. She wanted that to bring about the use, so that I was rediscovering primary control every time I picked up my kettle. It's the other way up. So that's quite a hard one to take on, perhaps, but perhaps it makes sense. I've been asking from the beginning, how did Alexander develop the technique? Because he had nobody to put hands on him. I'm sure a lot of you have asked the same question. And I can remember asking it very early on when I was visiting training schools in London. I asked this head of training, you know, how did he do it? And she said, Alexander was a very clever man. We can't do that. And I thought, fudge, you don't know. That's not good enough. So through those 4 years of working with Miss Goldie, she presented me with this discovery process, which I think is the one he describes in Use of the Self, you know, when he's trying to really bring about the change in his voice. I'll raise a hand, no, I won't. I'll speak, no, I won't. I'll do nothing. And then when he finally calms his nervous system and goes to speak, something completely different happens. And that's a key moment in his discovery process. But it's, so there it was. So it started me all on a 30-year journey to understand what the technique was about, what Miss Goldie was actually doing, because it was so different. And I wanted to know, you know, what was it? How could I bring it about for myself? Well, it took me to a lot of places. It first took me back to John Hunter, who'd been one of the main trainers on my training school, but had done a lot of work with Miss Goldie. And he was running workshops at the time, a few years after, in which he was trying to explore why was it so different. And he'd also worked with Erica Whittaker. So I then went to Erica Whittaker as well. And her work was different again. She taught me how the eyes lead, and you need just to get out of your own way and let your eyes lead you into movement. So there was another piece of it. And I was already doing Bates' technique for natural vision, and then I discovered Peter Grumbold. So I was very much aware of eyes being part of primary control. Then after a while, I discovered Bob Britton and his work on functional anatomy. And suddenly that woke anatomy up for me, because anatomy had always been utterly boring. You know, a muscle does this, and this muscle does this, and so what? And suddenly here was Bob Britton showing how it all linked up, and that was really interesting. I went to Jessica Wolf for her natural breathing. Again, I was already working masses with natural breathing, and it was good to get Jessica's take on it. And then I discovered craniosacral therapy, and that introduced me to the whole world of fascia and tensegrity, and the idea that the fascia connects everything to everything. And from that, I discovered Thomas Myers and his anatomy trains, which again, functional anatomy of how it all links up. I discovered Philip Shepherd and his work on deep embodiment, and how most of us just aren't present in the base of the body. And we think of ourselves as looking after our bodies rather than being a whole entity, being our bodies. And it's a very different mind shift that he teaches. And that was in there. And it's so linked to how Goldie taught, because with Goldie, one integrated, one became a whole being. And so many avenues were coming together through all this exploration, but something was missing. And I didn't realize what it was. In 2005, we moved to Ireland, and shortly after, I was extremely ill. I was bedbound and housebound for over a year, and lost all my strength, and was very contracted in, as it was tremendously painful and pretty horrible. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world, because it was breakthroughs in other ways. But when I came back after it, I had to put myself back together again. So I used my Miss Goldie work to reconnect things and bring my nervous system back to calm and just find my integrated being again. But the strength didn't come back. And I kept thinking, how do I use this come to quiet work to bring back my strength? And it never did. I used yoga, I used swimming, but I thought, come on, I've got to be able to do this from the technique. Where is it? And then our first Berlin workshop, Jana might remember, Rosa Louisa Rossi came, and she then came to Ireland to spend a week with me. And she suggested I look at the work of Jando Masuero and his initial Alexander technique. So I ended up taking lessons with him and listening to his podcasts on Robert Rickover's website first. And Jando had been asking the same questions of how did Alexander develop it all. And he's not, rather than a biologist, he's an engineer. So he wants more mechanical answers, and he's very much a rational thinking, problem solving person. Whereas I'm a how does a dog move without freeing its neck person. So it was fascinating, because he was asking these different questions. And he started to dig into the history and say, who was this Delsarte fellow? Because we knew that Alexander had trained with the Delsarte method, because it's on one of his first business cards. And Jando is French. And so when Delsarte's original writings were published in French, he was able to start reading them, because the modern Delsarte that's in America still is totally different. It's totally somatic. There's no thinking process in it. It's interesting, but it doesn't relate to us. So he discovered, Delsarte's writing is really hard to read. But he found through it little sentences here and there, a sort of mosaic of clues, as he describes it, through which he also knows Alexander's books extremely well, because he translated them into French. And by going between Delsarte's books and Alexander books and the photographs and his own knowledge of biomechanics, he started to put it together. And he recreated what Alexander must have been doing early on to sort out his deep tension levels, because after all, as we know from his own account, he was premature, he had a lot of tensions in him, and it didn't take him 10 years. He was back performing in under 18 months. So he'd sorted something very fast. Now, that cannot have been his own process, and he must have been using these strong pulls that Jandot has hypothesized. We don't know for definite, but it adds up, to free out his own tensions. And so I worked with him. Now, when Jandot was terribly worried when I first took my first lesson, he was waiting for me to walk out on him, because so many teachers senior teachers particularly, have just walked out on him. This isn't Alexander technique. This feels all wrong. It's far too doing. I'm out. And there was a part of my head that wanted to do that. It just felt so weird. And then after a while, I realized that the pulls he was asking me to do were actually bringing me into the same biomechanical use that Miss Goldie had done. And he was actually getting me to do for myself the pulls that she had done on me that I had never encountered in anyone else. At which point I was hooked. And I thought, this is the answer. And it started to explain that whole biomechanical side of Goldie's work that I'd been so intrigued by and just hadn't understood at the time. And it brought me back my strength. It brought back the elasticity. It opened out the final tensions from that illness. And within not very long, I was leaping around like a 10-year-old. And it's great. I couldn't have done that photo on the front of the book without that work. It just wouldn't have happened. I had because I'd had 3 years where I actually couldn't walk. And there I was being able to leap again. So it's very exciting. I then matched what I got from Jandot with the anatomy trends work, with the breathing work, and started to put it all together. And 4 years of hard writing, and the book came out at the other end. So it was a long journey. And also through that, my science head got reactivated, saying, okay, so what's the science behind this? It started to work out the anatomy as I've described, and I also started to say, what's the neuroscience here? Because again, Goldie's work was so precise, the way she brought you to quiet. And then it was so precise the way something different then happened. And it brought in so much more coordination, integration, strength, and mobility, all in one wonderful togetherness. Whereas we tend to think of those as separate. You do flexibility work, and then you do strength work, and then you do coordination work. And she did it all in one package. And so I started to look at the neuroscience as well. And it's all gone in the book. It was bloody hard work. I read a lot of science papers. It was very useful having the science background, because it meant I could read the research and sort it out. So there's an overview of the book, in which part 1 sets the scene, the basic biomechanics that we're working with, but also the thinking processes, which is, a lot of which is way beyond where science has got to. And because I was asking all the time, as I said, how do animals keep their necks free? Dogs don't go around thinking, how do I free the neck? And Alexander really discovered that we self-organize. A dog, if you think of a cat hunting a mouse, the cat sees the mouse, and that calls out the crouch, and then it calls out the stalk, and then it calls out the pounce. And all the time the cat is looking, and the eyes and the awareness of where the mouse is and what obstacles there are to weave around to get there, and how the wind is blowing and whether the mouse is being distracted. It's all being taken in by sensory means, feeding in and informing the intelligence of the system, coordinating the system, until in the end the cat pounces and gets its meal. And people used to think it's reflexes. It's not reflexes. This is a much more intelligent process. A reflex is an unintelligent process. We are incredibly intelligent through every cell in our being. And again, that's something that Alexander and Goldie used to talk about, that every part of us is intelligent. And we are waking consciousness and presence up, not just here, but all through the being. And that, again, is something science is now beginning to talk about. And it's a very exciting frontier. It's not just all in the brain. which is the myth we've been told for about 2,500 years, actually. They've been peddling the myth that it's all the head, only the head that's intelligent and the body's stupid. It's not true. And it very much fits with it. So the modern science all fits with what Alexander was doing 100 years ago, which is very exciting. And he tried to explain what he was doing in science at the time, and it didn't. He couldn't. And I think that's part of the reason why he was so glad when he went to using hands. Because the other thing I do in the book is rewrite history, the Alexander history. I haven't done it all by myself. There's a lot of people who've looked at the history at that point, but they all say slightly different things. So I've tried to pull it together. But what's totally emerged, Alexander writes in Use of the Self that he discovered it all by himself. It's absolute bollocks. Of course he didn't. Everybody learns from other people. But that's the message he had to give in order to launch himself in Edwardian England. It's okay. He had to tell that lie in order to be taken seriously. But actually, he started as a breathing man. It's now well known. And he was exploring natural elocution, he called it to start with. His first work was all about the torso. It wasn't about primary control at all. That phrase didn't even come in till 1923. He started hands-off, teaching the pupil by verbal instruction how to improve their breathing. And of course, he put hands on just to go, yeah, when you put your head there, this happens. But he wasn't thinking of those hands as actually doing anything. And he would get very cross with people. The technique, as we know, it started to come in after he got to London, and he started to read about kinesthesia and started to put some of the more Alexander ideas together. Mechanical integration, position of mechanical advantage came in. And by 1911, you got something that looked like the technique, but it was still the pupil doing it for themselves. His hands were guiding, but the pupil was to do it through instruction. And then there was a lull phase where he hadn't got so many pupils. And he started to think, what happens if I actually use all my, come to quiet through my hands? And he started to realize that he could communicate what he was teaching through the hands. And that was a tremendous relief for him, because then he could do it for them, because the pupils didn't understand why they were being asked to do these strange things. And so hands-on work began. But what was lost in that moment? It increasingly became hands-on work. Lily Westfeld describes in the first training course how one day he came in and he said, now I can get it completely for them without them doing anything. I can completely do it through my hands. And she said she never saw him have a bad temper again. So for him, it was much easier. But for us, something valuable was lost, because it becomes a sort of a case of follow my leader, where we have it done to us, and then somehow we have to work out how to do it for somebody else. And we're not really understanding what we're doing. So to put the science back on that, in a way, Alexander was looking for 100 years ago, but it wasn't there. It's very new, this science that can explain it for us. And I find that pupils really like it when they go, oh, okay, that's why you're asking me to inhibit. And that's why you're telling me to, put myself in these positions that feel weird. One can now explain to them why one is asking these things. And the modern pupil wants that. So that's enough from me. So who would like to kick off with some questions? That's from what you've just heard, or from what you read in the book, or heard from Robert's podcasts, or what makes sense of this to you? What makes you go, oi, hang on, what's she saying there? Anyone like to? Cheetah.
Yeah, I don't know quite where to start, but first of all, thank you so much for your amazing work, Penelope. It makes me all emotional because, listening to your path, your story is, I've kind of lost my way a little bit for the last couple of years with the technique, partly because I got involved with voice, with the naked voice, and which in many ways is very much has many similarities to the Alexander work, but because it's about, you know, using our voice, which we have with us all the time, just like the body. But and it has had enormous transformative effects on my physical body as well. So I'm a facilitator in that now, but I can't. I mean, the technique is a red thread in everything I do, and I have in my own story, you know, car accidents and things that really beat me up. So I've had to look and, like you, into the science. And I even got the technique to be a part of the second part of my my university course. So I have 2 masters, one in Alexandra and one in audio logopedics. So I have really dived into that as well, the way you have. But I looked at it more from the point of view of rehabilitation and the early reflexes, and you know, seeing what effect do they have when they're still there, and looking at it as something different from the postural reflexes.
Give me one moment. Can everybody else mute, please? And we can then it'd be clearer to. Thank you very much. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So I hear you when you say they're not reflexes. We really need to engage that. I've worked so much with trauma. I've worked with somatic experiencing, and I also worked with you 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago in New York, and it was amazing work. I mean, it was, and I also I felt then that I don't know that I would have been able to do that, you know, after my accident, not back in 1980. Maybe it could have been a bit adapted, but I really feel like now I'm ready, and I'm going to, after we've done this, I'm going to go in and I'm going to order your book, because I want to study this deeper now and really make use of your beautiful compilation of all of this beautiful piece of work. And I can see that, you know, you and I are going to be doing some interesting work, because there's something to be brought in here. So I don't really know what the question is, just a deep appreciation of your path and what you've done. And thank you for it, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you very much. Yes, and look forward to working more together on it. So, yeah, thank you. Anybody else? I mean, has anyone looked at the book and gone, what are those pictures on page? Where are they?
Yes, I have a question.
Go on, Jana.
In the book, I also wrote you already that as I was really looking forward to the book, and when I got it and opened it and had to pay 15 euros for taxes and all of this, like it was a really big thing. I was very overwhelmed, first of all, by the size. Mm-hmm. and later on, now I understood I was really expecting something totally different, more in the size of Fiona Robb's book or something. So I was on the wrong path. But I can say for me, it's not easy to handle the book, to understand, to work with it. Also because of the size and how do I hold it? Where do I hold it? And another question is, like it said, there are 12 fundamentals of integrated movements. And for me, it's hard to navigate through the index, like because there are 3 parts. Each part has different chapters. The chapters have different lessons. So I would like to ask you for some orientation this, because there are a lot of numbers, and numbers are supposed to help me navigate, but I'm a bit lost. Sure. And also, this is another question.
Yeah, it is a big book, and you're not the first person to say, hey, this is a bit overwhelming. Where do I begin? Well, there is one simple answer, which is begin at the beginning, work through to the end, and then stop. This is the size of it. It is a textbook. Mm-hmm. It is a textbook. There's lots of pictures, lots of diagrams, and yes, it's the 3 parts. The first, have you tried the first paragraph? Have you tried the first chapter?
Definitely. Like I'm here when you can see. Okay. And sometimes, like after the book author's book club, I just opened chapter 17, what you said, because I personally, I'm more interested in the philosophical account of our technique, like all this mechanical anatomy. This, for me, this is too much in the head. I love more, I don't know, what is his name? Robert Sheppermant or something?
Philip Shepherd.
Philip Shepherd.
Yes.
Like what you said, this for me, it's really interesting.
In which
Yeah, that's why I had to jump, because I was a bit...
Sure, absolutely. So there are 3 parts, and the logical sequence to read them is in 1, 2, 3, but you can also go 1, 3.
Okay.
You can miss part 2 if you really don't like the physical side, then miss part 2. You will be missing something, but you can leap and go from part 1 to part 3. It's essential to do part 1 first. Chapter 2 sets the overview of the firstly of the right left brain, which is such an important piece, and how that then relates to brain and thinking brain body. And to give you a very quick sort of idea of that, think of if you want to go from A to B, you can find your way through the landscape, or you can use a map. And the map gives you a symbolic representation of the landscape. It tells you where the crossroads are. It tells you where the hills and the valleys and the rivers are. But you have no idea from the map of how green the grass is, of how the mountain smells, of whether the birds will sing, of whether the church on the map has a spire, a tower, or whether it's nasty Victorian or whether it's an amazing old Gothic event thing. So, and that's really the difference between the right and the left brain. The left brain is a map. It tells us, it remembers things like how to put the key in the car, and that if I use my key, the lock will turn, and then I can use it then to start the engine, and I don't have to think about that. I've got this mechanical ABC to do to start my car. But the right brain gives me the experience. It feels that moment of turning the lock. It has the sense of when the starter motor isn't working, and I have to maybe turn it a bit more, because it's sensing it. It's in the present with the event that's actually happening. So that's such a key part of it all, because if we're coming from left brain, we're not going to get anywhere. A lot of this book is about integrating the 2 sides of the brain. But of course, as Alexander teaches, we like the right brain. We want to be in touch with our body. And a lot of people look at the book and go, oi, too much for my left brain, too overwhelming. And what I've tried to do is write it in such a way that it leads you, that it's in informal language. It's an easy read, isn't it? People have told me it's an easy read. You're working in a different language, so maybe
no, it's true. Yeah, it's easy, but sorry, I just want to share my difficulties.
Yes.
Because it's an easy language, but after I saw the volume and all the signs, I was expecting a more difficult language. So I'm sometimes disturbed by the easy language.
Yes, and the publisher was saying, this is too informal language. This is just an easy public book. And I said, no, it isn't. And the reason for the informal language is so that the science starts to percolate into the right brain. And every bit of science is then followed by an exploration where we then take it into the body and we work it out. And that's why I say it is very carefully structured, actually, so that if you just take it through step by step by step, it will lead you through the process. Having said that, people get to so far through the book and then go, oh, I think I better go back and start again. And, so there's because very often we need more of an overview, and then we need to go back and do it again in more detail. So I would say, if you do go A to Z, do it twice. I always read, I don't know about you, but I always read things I really want to know. I always read them twice, because the first reading just sort of starts to give us that map. Because at the moment, that's what you're asking for, Jana, is the map. Is hearing.
Why I would love, can I say something?
Yes, please.
And why I would love this reading club is to share the experience and the difficulties, because I love how you made it, and because I'm also at the moment writing my PhD, and I would love to combine those 2 parts of the brains in a book, because a book is leading us to the left half.
Yes.
but I have to say, this is a new way of reading. And of course, it's very great, generous, and clever with those explorations, with the videos like this. It's an interactive book. And in the same time, I have to say my reading habits are differently, and they are really challenged by those, by the integration, because I'm not used to this kind of reading.
Yes, yes. And what's your PhD in?
Well, it's in mathematics education.
Right.
And in a way, also, of course, it's really enriched by standard technique, because it's about the importance of activities such as ordering and classifying for mathematical conceptions.
Wow.
And this, now I was just inspired by, yeah, it's actually also in mathematics, although we think it's only left half, we need the right half. We need to have experience to tell us this is a true sentence, because we feel that 2 + 3 = 5. This is like, this is a deep insight, which is not only a symbol.
Absolutely. Philip Shepherd did an exercise with us once. It was an advanced work exercise where he got us doing maths from our pelvic floor.
From what? From?
To take our intelligence down, right down to the pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got us sitting in pairs. He took us all down to the pelvic floor. So our presence, so because I talk about mind in the brain, he talks about mind in the pelvic floor. And he got us then asking each other mathematical equations and staying out of the head and let the pelvic floor give the answers. It was amazing. You know, your pelvic floor can do maths. This is what, yes, the intelligence of the body. And apparently, I've heard that the great mathematicians, they channel it sometimes, don't they? They're sort of, there's that Indian man, I watched the film on him. Did you watch that? Back in the 1920s, it was a fascinating film. I forget what it's called. You'd love it. And he was in temples just channeling these huge mathematical, and somebody discovered him and they took him to Oxford, Cambridge. And of course, Cambridge treated him pretty cruelly as an Indian man back in 1920s who had no formal education. But in fact, he then died of tuberculosis because the climate was very hard for him. And he was very unloved and he couldn't bring his wife and he missed his country. And but apparently they're still working out what he wrote down. But it wasn't thought out logically, it was just somehow felt. Yeah, so I mean, it took me a long while to step out of writing formal language, and to be able to write in this way. And because the formal language, and you have to write the formal language for your PhD, it was years. I had to loosen up my thinking and my reading as well. It was quite a journey. And to be able to do something as simple as look at a buttercup, you know the little yellow flower, the buttercup, without going ranunculus repens, but just instead, which is its Latin name, but just instead to see the buttercup and experience the buttercup without even naming buttercup, just to see it. And of course, all the knowledge about buttercup, ranunculus repens is still there, but actually just to be able to see the flower. We need both, don't we? How does that feel, Jana?
It's really, it's fine. It's good. It's yeah, I love that I can express and that we can be in exchange about this and about the challenges. And yeah, it's a path.
Well, it is, and it's, yeah, I'd love you to join the book club because, and that again, the point of the book club is that we all just we share it together and we just read a small bit at a time and take it gently. And I feed in every so often, you know, this actually relates to chapter 12 and relates to chapter 17, and we start to put together the structure of it, because that's what Goldie's work was all about, was integration. And you know, that's again a passion of mine, is how do we integrate this knowledge so that we integrate the science and the biomechanics and the come to quiet and the sheer experience of it.
Great. Well, with this integration, I feel there's always the fear that we lose once or that we lose both, because there's so much thinking in either formal or experience. And when we bring both together, that we can also trust that both is still there and is not diminished by the other.
So that's interesting. Yeah. Yes. That we, but the whole can be greater than the parts, can't it? And the whole can be fed by the parts. That's an interesting fear, though. That by putting things together, we will lose the essence of both. Yes. Rather than, and science has kept things apart for so long, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And science is now beginning to play with interdisciplinary. The internet's brought so much of that, because one can actually read. I couldn't have done the book without the internet. Wikipedia, bless Wikipedia, and ResearchGate, and yeah, because I don't have access to a university library. Micah.
I also have a question. I've done a lot of your training works already, but I'm interested in how the book club is going to be about. What are you going to do?
Okay, yeah. So there are 3 clubs running already. We started the first one in June, and then the second one, which is for European, it's 5 o'clock in the evening time. So, and then the second one was started in late September, and that's also, and then we started one in Australian time. I get up early in the morning in October, and each we pair everybody with a study buddy. Everybody's paired off, so everybody's got a partner, and each 2 weeks we say, read this chapter, or very often this half of this chapter. I'm taking it, we take it slowly, and in that 2 weeks they read it for themselves, they play with the explorations themselves, and then they get together with their partner, usually online. There's some people are lucky enough to live in the same place, and you talk it. You one of you be the teacher and the other be the pupil, and you talk it through. And because there's nothing like teaching something to understand it better. And so you've been through this process in the training to teach online, of course, Micah, already, and so you'll know about that one, that it's when one's doing several things there. First is we're learning to language it, because a lot of this work is quite different to what we had on our training schools, the way we were taught, which often wasn't verbal at all. So we're learning to put it in language. We're learning to then watch the pupil as we deliver that language, and see, are they understanding it, checking back with them, getting them then to feed back to us, because you do something nice to a pupil's neck, and you think, and you say to them, how's that? And they go, okay, give me some more than that. Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, tell me more. It's nice, yes, and what are you aware of? Oh, my neck feels longer. There we go. And that process for the pupil also of languaging really helps them integrate their process. And that has never been part of the traditional technique. Alexander, I think, wasn't after his pupils doing that. But it really speeds the learning for the modern pupil, because modern pupils want to be much more interactive, I think. The old model where you went to a lesson and you just stood in front of the chair and they did something a bit strange to you and a bit weird, and they didn't tell you what was happening. Then you went away and came back again next week for months and months and months and months. Modern pupils just won't put up with that. I mean, some want the nice relaxed table turn, but most of them, they've got their back problem. They want to know what's going on, how to fix it, how can I do it for myself.
Many of them already have ideas of what's going to need to be changed, and so I think there's a lot of intelligence already coming from pupils.
Absolutely.
And if you just shut up the language, then you don't let them. Yeah, you stop also the verbal understanding or the intelligent understanding in that way.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And we want to harness our pupils' intelligence and to guide it out of wanting to fix the problem into wanting to work with the problem and engage their proprioception and stay out of the way and let the whole thing integrate rather than get in there and do something. So, the more we can talk about that intelligently with them, the easier it is, the more fun it is for the pupil, the more excitement. when I started introducing the pulls, I saw the excitement in my pupils that I'd actually never seen before, because the rest is nice. But, when you learn to sort of put your own shoulder somewhere different in an integrating way and the pain stops, it's like, wow, tell me more. And you can do something different with the pupils each lesson. So by learning, so back to your question, Micah, so by working with another teacher or trainee or whoever you've been paired with, if somebody is not yet a trainee, we put them as a practice pupil, because that's the other thing, is that teachers, it's useful to take a practice pupil, so that you can work it all out and feel confident with it before you try it out in a real paying pupil situation. Because some people are happy to launch straight in there and play around with paying pupils, but a lot of people aren't. They want to feel more confident first. So that's very much sort of part of it. Each week, as I say, you work through it with your partner, and then we all get together at the book club and people ask their questions. And then we go through the main explorations of that all together. So we go through pull to the elbow, and people get to go, okay, is that right? I can guide them. And we can also ask questions of how much to pull, how little to pull, am I breathing at the same time, how much is too much, all that, and have I got the angle right? So we can really refine what's happening and check that people all are understanding together before we then say, okay, right, let's move on to the next section. And so we build it up. How does that sound? And the whole thing is going to take at least a year to go through the book, because there's 18 chapters. And we don't want to be rushing that process, because it's building. Again, I don't know whether you've picked this up, Jana, but a lot of people who have read the book so far commented how it builds. That's why I say you have to read part 1 first, because that's your foundations, because it gives you the biomechanical, how the whole thing sort of towers together, and then the thinking process is how to bring in this fully embodied intelligence of the body, and then the breathing work, which again, the breathing work for me is a lot about embodiment, and it's about letting the body organize itself. And breathing isn't just up here, we breathe into the legs, we breathe into the pelvis, we breathe into the lower back, we breathe into the chest, we breathe into here, we breathe up to here, we get the whole body breathing, because there's an integration of that. And then if you want to skip chapters 7 to 14, which are the biomechanical stuff, then 15 is the pure Goldie discovery process, the ball game that those of you probably did that on my workshop in Berlin years ago, the ball game. I love that ball game. And 16 is the real scientific exploration of the integration of movement, of the neuroscience of that. 17 is the voice that we did on the workshop the other day. And 18 is hands-on work, of how to apply the whole thing to hands-on work. How does that sound? I'd love you to join in if you wanted to, if you've got time along with the Goldie Club and the Fitness Club.
I was just really curious how you're going to work with the book. And it's the other courses are also feeding a lot what we are, this whole process, and I'm already teaching a lot of this stuff, giving workshops and lessons and so on, online, offline. And so I'm halfway through the book. Now someone has gone, switch to the other side. So yeah, I'm thinking about it, and I'll let you know if I join.
Lovely. Jita.
Well, I'm just loving what I'm hearing, and I'm just the question is, you've got 3 book clubs, and I should have read that. I should have probably seen it on your website. Is it possible to get into it right now, or are you starting a new club?
Yes, we're starting the new group.
You're starting a new group.
Clarify that. Yeah, so yes, we're starting from the beginning. The training to teach online course eventually. People could join at any point, but this can't. It's the way it's working. I do want a group of people to start together and work together through the book, and it's working very well actually. We seem to have found a speed that nearly everybody's coping with. Obviously, from time to time, people get a little bit behind and they catch up again. But by and large, we seem to have found a rhythm that people are keeping up with. And there's been very few dropouts, which is brilliant. Over 100 people doing it so far over those 3 clubs. And yeah, it's going really well. And people are starting to put the structure together and use it in their own work. And I do encourage people to either start trying it with their pupils or to take a practice pupil. You know, find a cousin or a starving musician who wants work but hasn't any money, and you know, to take them as a more playful pupil who doesn't mind one ballsing up a few times and stumbling the words. And again, that can be really, really useful. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else has some questions? Sabine, is anything striking you that you're curious about?
I mean, I'm taking lots of notes and like feeling really excited just to spend time with other people and like talking about this and like just hearing about it, because I also felt really out of the technique for a while, and like I graduated in 2018, and like since then I've been doing some like I've been teaching dancing a lot in the last couple of years, and I also use like principles of the Alexander technique and like for my dance teaching, but I haven't found a way to teach Alexander technique. And I feel also with COVID that it's like, oh, it's just like a bit heavy to get started. And but I always get so excited when I talk about it, or when I hear other people talk about it. And it always gives this like, oh, it's important. Like this feeling of like, no, I can't just leave it or let it sit. Like,
and it's great that you're bringing it into your dance work. And again, the way I'm teaching it, I think, makes much more of a bridge to dance work, to movement, to fitness work. It was interesting because I talked so much about spatial awareness. And can you still hear me, Sabine, or have you frozen? I think you might have frozen. Here am I talking on, and let's just give her system a moment to catch up again. God, I'll just tell everybody else first that yeah, I mean, you probably heard me mention the fitness club to Micah, which is where it's for people who've been through either the whole book or the training to teach online process Micah did, where we start putting it together with, you know, how do we take this into yoga? How do we take it into fitness moves? How do we do a squat thrust? How do we do gym moves? And it's working much more with your back. Lovely.
Yeah, I had a gap for like a minute.
Yes. So yeah, what I was saying was it makes a bridge. This work too can make a bridge to movement work. I talk a lot about spatial awareness and again the embodiment. And when I was in New York 2.5 years ago with Gita at the AMSAT conference, are you still there? Yes, you are. Yes. There was another conference on just before it, which was somatics, and it was a joint conference between dance teachers and somatics. So I went to that first, and it was interesting that it was the dance people who were talking my language, because they were talking about spatial awareness on stage and spatial awareness to the other people, and really letting the brain inform itself around spatial awareness. And I thought, this is interesting. They've got this stuff, and different of the dance teachers each had sort of one bit of my stuff. I was thinking, yeah, that's really interesting here. So I think there's a lot of interface, and then the pulls, of course, are bringing in precision of movement and strength in the pelvis integration across the pelvic region, for instance, which then allows one to balance. And Micah, you want to?
I just have one really strong experience back when I was dancing, when I was in Amsterdam at the SNDO doing an intensive course of whether I would enter the school or not. We had really great improvisation classes, and I never really had, it's really a long time ago, I never really had experienced improvisation intensively with structures and blah, 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 good teachers before. And one day in an improv session, I was thinking, this is Alexander technique. It's just exactly the same thing. So, and all afterwards, when I was starting having teachers, this just totally makes sense that, spatial awareness. And also when you watch ballet, it's the pose, actually they are not something that someone thought, this is interesting, this makes sense, but it's already there in so many other movements and movement techniques, I think.
So yes, to take practice pupils to work with a teacher also can give you the confidence actually to take Alexander pupils online even. I mean, I don't know whether Berlin is, or no, you're in Copenhagen. Are you in lockdown at the moment, or are you allowed to work in person?
We're allowed to work. Yeah. Just with Corona Pass.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, people often do my workshops to wake things up for themselves, to get their practice going again. So that would be marvelous, because I think it's really hard for anyone who trained just before COVID or qualified during COVID, because they've got this qualification and they don't know how to get started. It's not been the easiest time, but got to do it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm thinking about, like, because now in my, like, where I live, we have a room free for the next month. So I'm thinking to do it here. And I'm thinking a lot about this, how do you say this, getting trust or like safety with the pupil. So I want to like find a format where I can first do a foundation, like for 2 or 4 times with them, where we just practice like getting the same language and what does touch mean and like how do we work well together, and then starting the real work. But like, I don't know, I'm thinking about the form of it, and like, should I experiment more and get more feedback and like offer the foundation?
Interesting idea to do a couple of
and like for free, so that I can also teach, and I do a lot of content improvisation. And like there's so much from that world that I feel like is so like obvious to work with for just nonverbal communication. So I would definitely put a lot of that in it. And I'm also like, but would people be like, this is not Alexander technique? And I'm like, yeah, but making a foundation will be just not Alexander technique, but building a foundation for Alexander technique, and how to justify it or to be paid for it, or like how to do it. Like, so I'm thinking a lot about these kind of forms.
Sounds
of
interesting.
teaching.
And remember that if you're putting work in, you deserve to be paid for it.
Thank you.
They're getting something out of it, I think for a long time we were, people would, now I'm doing Alexander technique, now I'm doing counseling, now I'm doing osteopathy, and it doesn't make sense. I ask the question all the time of the pupil in front of me, what does this pupil need right now? Do they need to free their necks? Do they need my hands on them? Do they actually need me to back off because actually they're furiously angry and I just need to guide them to stamp around the floor a bit and even yell a bit and tell me what's going on? And that may be the whole lesson. And just guiding them that, now you're tensing your shoulders, let your shoulders go, really tell me from your heart what's going on. Okay, now you're clenching your jaw, just let it rip. And, you can do amazing lessons with all sorts of things. Somebody who insists on taking a mobile phone call in the middle of the lesson. Okay, so don't rush across to your phone. Now be gentle as you pick it up. Yeah, it's your sister on the phone, isn't it? Yeah, don't screw your mouth up. Just, and, you can do the most amazing lessons that just come out of where the pupil's at. And if I do go into craniosacral work for the lesson, I will say, gee, this is craniosacral work, but I'm still directing you in an Alexander way. I'm still going to ask you to do the Alexander breathing as I'm doing it. And now I'm sensing in and I'm doing a bit of kinesiology to find out actually where you've gone. And that isn't Alexander either. So I'm telling them all the time what's what, so they don't come away with a sort of mishmashed idea of what Alexander is. And that's, I think, is important, because otherwise people come out of a session where we actually just have sat and talked about their mother-in-law, because that's what they needed that day. And I didn't know Alexander technique was about talking. Well, no, it isn't. But the Alexander is the fund, is underpinning everything I'm doing. And all the time I'm looking to embody them, whether their hands are, whether my hands are on or off. How does that sound? And the more tools we have, the more we can help that pupil with what is needed for that pupil in that moment. Because I think when somebody's furiously angry, they don't want their necks freed, thank you. They don't want their hands on them. They want space in that moment. It can be crowding. Jana.
I would like to ask you like a little favor or something. On Sunday, there was this authors club, and I was deeply touched by the exercise you did with us. And when you talked today about how to come to quiet, I was so much more quiet in the last 2 days. It was amazing. So I wanted to ask you if you could today do with us a little short exercise about how to come to quiet.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking, Jana, because we haven't done anything practical. So let's do the nose feather and the eyes to come to quiet. So just imagining, and come to quiet is quietening the whole nervous system, which is about bringing the pupil safe, and it's crucial. So just looking out at something and imagining there's a feather on your nose, and it's a great extendable feather, and it's going to extend right out to what you're looking at, and it's going to tickle it. And there's all those little wisps along the feather, and letting them all have their space. So we're not being drawn down the feather, but I'm at one end of the feather, and what I'm looking at, which for me is my clock, is at the other end of the feather. And as the feather tickles it, it picks up the texture of the clock, which is plastic, but it's not a totally smooth plastic, according to my feather. And it's picking up the light and the shade and the contours of it, the rather sharp corners it's got. And then the shininess of the glass. So allowing the information, not just the what, the map as it were, the left brain, but the complete experience, the light on it, the shape of it, the texture of it. Is it moving? Is it still? And just let your feather tickle around it. And what that's doing is it's bringing your attention and both your eyes all to the same point. Because so often our attention is off somewhere else, and one eye is working, but the other eye isn't. One eye often takes the lead. So invite it all to be present at the same point with this feather. And if you don't like imagery, just seeing across that space, just being aware of the substance of space, if that's not a strange thing to say. We usually contract the space and just dive after it. Getting the space before. And we've also got our peripheral vision. Just letting your feather begin to trail across maybe onto the next object and explore that. And because the feather is sort of drawing across, it will also draw across the spaces between objects, which we tend to discount. We tend to think, oh yes, clock, pencil, phone, and not see that there's all sorts of textures on the table in between, or maybe no texture, maybe it's a smooth table. But just being aware of the space, and the space is either side of us. And then we can also be aware of the space above us, space below us, even the space behind us. And just letting that nose feather actually be a brain feather, because the brain that sees, it's not the eyes that see at all, it's the brain, and it's the back of the brain. That's where the visual cortex is right at the back. Just letting yourself see us across the space of the head. And then out through the eyes, across the space to what we're seeing. And behind what we're seeing is more space. And so everything starts to come into relationship. Because when we're stressed, we just tend to contract down to what we're seeing, and we don't see the bigger picture, which is also losing the right brain. Right brain keeps the overview. And when you have all these bigger spaces, bigger awareness of how it all links together, your eyes gently move around, you might be aware that as your eyes track around, say, to the left, to another object, and then another object to the left, that the neck actually will turn, but you're not making it turn. It's as if there's no muscles there at all. The neck just flows, because the eyes have self-organized the muscles of the neck, and they're just organizing those muscles into the right engagement of this muscle a little more, this muscle a little less. And so there's no fighting in there between the muscles, of some muscles trying to pull against other muscles to turn the neck. It's just sorting itself out moment by moment by moment. And you re-experience the ease of your neck turning as your eyes lead the head into movement. And here we are discovering primary control all over again. We're discovering that the eyes need the head and the neck freeze.
Penelope, one question to it. When you, as the feather is brushing, when you are there with your sensing what the feather is sensing, do you then skip to peripheral awareness, or do you have it at the same time, or is it like a jumping in between?
Well, I think initially, before we're very linked up, it's a jumping in between. And then, but actually what we want is to be all linked up. There comes a magic moment where everything comes present together. And I don't know whether you know the paintings of Vermeer, say the girl with the lute and the checkered floor and the forget what century, 15th century, 16th century, I forget, but they're amazingly beautiful paintings. And they have such stillness and such a presence where everything in the room is present together on this checkered floor. And the checkered floor really, you know, it marks space. There's such volumes in these pictures. Maybe you can picture something similar.
I mean, yeah, it's just very small technical question maybe, because I think I also feel it's developing and changing, of course, all the time. But people are asking, where's the focus? Is it on the feather? Is it outside? Or and when you are outside and around and above and below, then am I still sensing really what the feather is sensing, or am I then completing the whole picture? You know, this.
Very, very good question. In the West, we are taught to focus on what we're looking at.
Mm.
You know, we were taught at school by the teacher, pay attention to the board. Don't be watching that scrap going on outside the window. Pay attention to the board. And every child knows they can keep an eye on the scrap and be aware of what the teacher's saying at the same time, but it wasn't allowed. You had to focus forwards. And I once played a game in a university cafe of spotting the academics. And I'm sure I could tell them, because their eyes were like laser beams. They just didn't have peripheral vision. It's as if they were always looking down a microscope. It's like that's where the academic mind wants to be. And in the Far East, they're much more likely to see the whole picture. There's a wonderful experiment that people have done of showing a picture of a tiger in front of a forest to a group of Americans and then a group of Japanese. And they ask, what do you see? And the Americans say, I see a tiger. End of subject. And the Japanese say, well, there's that tree, beautiful tree with the curly bark, and then there's that bird, and there's that flower, and there's this tree with something else, and there's a tiger. And they're seeing the whole. And it's a very different viewpoint. And of course, their writing is encouraging the right brain because it's pictorial. I think there's, this is something that McGilchrist talks about in his book on right left brain. The pictorial writing keeps that bigger sense, I think, or maybe it's the other way around. They have the bigger sense and therefore get the pictorial writing. So it can take a bit. It took quite a lot of work for myself before it joined up, and my eyes will still go back to the habit of tunneling in if I don't watch it, because I come from an academic family, and then I was in academia until the age of 24. Just to keep widening out, just to keep that sense of inviting this. And to start with, it is, oh yeah, there's my peripheral, there's my sense of behind. And then there's that magic moment where it all joins up. And when that happens, I'm also aware of the volume of my own body. Just come back to this nose feather moving around. And as you come into relationship with the spaces of the room, in which you're seeing both background and foreground, as it were, to put it in Philip Shepherd's language. In other words, the peripheral vision of the room and the specific that you're paying attention to. And then are you also aware of your body? So there's Jana.
I was just wondering, couldn't it be that there is both, and that we also switch from like focusing and then we go back to see the whole? I was wondering that it's not necessary to have all the time both, or to develop to have both. And I loved in this exercise that with the feather I went into, and then yeah, there's the space, and then I go again into. Isn't it more about the flexibility of change, that we are able to change between those two perceptions?
Absolutely, exactly. It's like we don't have to be up all the time. If I'm a guitarist, classical guitarists have to go down here for some of their chords, and then they need to come out again.
Yeah.
It's like, and to tell them they can't do that is to tell them they can't do those chords. It doesn't make sense. They have to be able to do that movement, and then they have to be able to come out again. The problem is they go into that and then they get stuck and they play from that place.
Yeah, or like when I take a photograph, when I want to focus, or now I focus on you, I see you sharp in my surrounding, not sharp. I can't change it.
Yes, that's true. And predator eyes. If you just stare at something without the peripheral vision, it's the wolf who's fixed the eyes, or the mouse, the cat who fixes the eyes on the mouse. We need that flexibility, and so many of us have lost that flexibility. We've lost that overall sense, so we're recapturing it. I've worked with people who only have this sort of lovely floaty sense, and they can't bring the eyes into the focus. And it's actually, but when we manage that, we really come present, I think. And it's, as you say, it's something to flow to and from. Not something we have to keep all the time.
Well, I'm loving what I'm hearing. I'm just thinking, well, it's the flow between the end, and Alexander will call it the means whereby, but it's kind of, I would say, the end out there on the horizon and the landscape I'm traveling through, and it's keeping that. And as I'm traveling through the landscape, maybe my end changes, so it's also the masculine and the feminine principle. Yeah. To bring those two together, the focused attention and the diffuse awareness to stay and to be able to hold that whole space. I think that it's really lovely. And I'm just thinking, just looking at the screen, to how we can look at one of these little squares, but have an awareness of all the others at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and yet also a sense of ourselves present in the room, because we do just get drawn into the screen, don't we?
Yeah.
We need to keep that sense of the space between me and computer and my bum on the chair. And in fact, the clock is ticking to keep that wider awareness, because otherwise, you know, I really had to work on that when I was writing the book, because, you know, it drew me in. And the way I did it was I had a 10-minute timer on my phone, and I put the phone at the other end of the room. So every 10 minutes, I had to get up, walk to the other end of the room and go, oh, right, there's a world out there. Turn my phone, reset my phone, walk back again, come back. And it helped me, you know, not actually hurt myself, because by the end of that 10 minutes, I was often being drawn in again. And okay, break again, take that walk away, come back again, find my body. And it got easier and easier as I did that, to stay with my body and to stay with myself as I was doing the work.
So that's really also about trust, Penelope, because you trusted that you could break away from what you were being drawn into and come back and actually be better, you know, be in a better space.
Yes.
Even though you're
Absolutely.
away from it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the arguments that my brain put up the first few times I did it was something else, as you could imagine.
Yeah.
Because
sure.
there was that huge fear that if I walked away, I wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
And I was saying to myself, and that was why the time was set for 10 minutes, not half an hour. Because by half an hour, one actually needs a proper break, but 10 minutes you don't. So I really could convince my brain that I could walk away and come straight back. It's okay, we're coming straight back, don't worry. and it really allowed the flow. I was able to go from 2 hours work on the book to 12 hours in a day. It just made that switch to be able to do the whole days on the computer, because I got that freedom. You know, sometimes I'd be walking back, actually I want to wee, actually it's time to go and do some gardening, I'm thirsty, I'll go make a drink. And so, you know, that time of walking to and from also gave those interoceptive voices of, actually I've had enough sitting still now, to actually emerge, whereas otherwise one's just in there and you stop hearing those voices and then you hurt yourself.
Beautiful.
We're out of time. Any more questions there before we go on? I'll just tell you that the book study club actually starts on Monday the 31st, and if you'd like all to join in, I'd love it. The meetings are at 5 o'clock in the evening. So for you in Europe, that's 6 o'clock in the evening. They last 90 minutes, they're an hour and a half. Melbourne's not so easy, Grace. I'm afraid it's the middle of the night for you. But there are plenty of people who have simply done it through the seminars. So if you wanted to join in, every seminar is recorded. You get matched with a study buddy, same as everybody else. You can be working away at it, and you can send questions on email. You can put questions in a Facebook group. So there's always people in the group who we never see. And there are people in Australia I can pair you with as well. I don't know how many there'll be in this club, but there are people who've done this work before. So if needed, we can pair you with somebody in Australia. Do you have any questions?
Well, I have a lot of things to say, but not enough time now. Next time.
Okay.
Do that one, Penelope. Will you send this recording out to us as well, will you?
Yes, absolutely. You'll get this recording because the other.
Because I have my partner is in Austin, Texas, so and I would want for us to be able to work together. That would be great. And,
that would be brilliant.
So I could send her, and she's actually trained as an Alexander teacher as well a long time ago, with the Seattle people. So that would be a good thing if that could be possible. So I can send the recording to her. She can.
Yes, please do in the circumstances. Yes, absolutely. Please don't put it on Facebook and send it out.
No.
Anyone who's interested in this work is, yes, please do. I'll be, there'll be plenty of people who email me in the next few days saying, damn, I missed it. Can I have the recording? And the answer is yes, but it won't be going up for public view. That's,
Thank you.
Jana.
I also have one last question or two. First of all, how much is the book?
Oh yes, I keep it very affordable. It's a subscription fee rather than a one-off fee. So it's €25 a month, and for anyone who's hard up, it's €20 a month. It's your choice which payment you do. And there's no commitment, so you can try it for a month or two, and if it really doesn't fit you and your schedule and you don't like the way it works, you can drop out. And so we don't know how long it will carry on for. It will probably be around about a year, but it may be a month less or a few months afterwards. And so that's the way I've done it with the subscription, so it can be a little bit open-ended.
Okay, great.
And
And
keeps
from,
it affordable.
I know already that this time is not possible for me, Mondays at 6 o'clock. So I was wondering, yeah, I could do this like offline just with a partner, or could it also be possible? Also, what would you recommend? I could also go to the online teaching course, like
the training to teach online course,
Yeah.
again, no longer has seminars. The videos are still up there to buy, and some people are occasionally saying that's the course I want because I really do want to learn to teach online. But it's no longer set up. There's no longer seminars with it. And you know, if they really want, they can ring me. They can. Thanks, Micah. Nice to see you. And if they want, we will set them up with a study buddy, but usually they just end up working on their own. So there's not the same interaction that you have with the book study club. Even though you can't come to the seminars, you'll still be part of the group. And
okay.
How does that sound?
Yeah, it sounds still interesting. I
Yeah, and there may be the odd one you can
think about. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It'd
Okay.
be lovely. It'd be lovely if you did want to come.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also have
Any
to-
last questions about it before we finish? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Penelope.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you so
all.
much.
Yes, and hope to see you soon. I'll send you on details with the recording. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.